Thank you. Okay, good morning. I want to thank all of you for being here today. We started out with 24 summons and 12 of you responded. So again, hopefully we're going to have enough to go forward today. I know you're all busy. You have many important things to do. I will tell you this, that it might be cooler in here than it might be outside, so that might not be a bad thing. And I know that being a juror is not only an honor, it's probably one of the most important services we can ask you to provide. So again, I'm very grateful that you're here, and I know everyone here is grateful you're here too. Today's case is going to be a criminal case, and it is entitled The City of Longview versus Susan Marie Fadden. And the city has charged a defendant with the crime of making a false statement to a public servant. And Ms. Fadden has entered a plea of not guilty to these charges, and she is presumed innocent. The filing of the charge in and of itself is not evidence. The City of Longview is represented by prosecuting attorney Steve Schuman. Mr. Schuman, could you please introduce yourself?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Schuman. I represent the City of Longview.
Thank you. And then Ms. Fadden is represented by Mr. Kevin Blondin. Mr. Blondin, if you could introduce yourself and your client, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kevin Blondin. This is my client, Susan Fadden.
Okay, thank you so much. We intend to complete this case today, so I don't see us going past today, and we're going to have it submitted for the jury's deliberation by the end of the afternoon. And we're going to start by selecting a 6-person juror because this is district court. And during the selection process, the attorneys and I are going to be asking you some questions. And the law requires you to take an oath to answer these questions truthfully. So if you could please do me a great favor and stand up at this point. What I need you to do is raise your right hand, and then the clerk is going to go ahead and give you the oath.
Do each of you solemnly swear to truthfully answer all questions asked of you by the court or counsel relating to your qualifications for acting as jurors in this trial? If you agree, answer I do.
Thank you so much. Go ahead and have a seat. The right to a jury trial means it's a right to an impartial jury. So it's important that all of the jurors are going to decide the case based purely on the evidence presented at the trial and the instructions on the law that I'm going to give you before you go out to deliberate. When the attorneys and I ask questions, it's not just because we're being nosy, it's because we want to make sure you can put aside any preconceptions that you might have when you walked in the door this morning. And we want you to decide the case just based on the evidence and just based on the law. After the attorneys and I ask questions, then each side is going to have the opportunity to exclude up to 3 jurors. These are known as peremptory challenges. They do not have a particular, or do not have to have a particular reason to exclude any jurors. And these decisions are going to be indicated privately so that no one is embarrassed. At this time, I'd like to begin by asking some general questions. And to all of you who are here for jury service, if you can answer these questions by saying yes or no, what you need to do is you need to raise your paddle so I can see it. And then I will ask you what your name is. And after you answer or I ask you questions, then the attorneys may ask questions as well. So first of all, again, let me remind you, this is City of Longview versus Susan Marie Fadden. Has anybody heard of this case before? All right. When you were in the lobby before being called in, did you hear anybody discussing the case or talking about the case? No. Do you know Ms. Fadden? No. Do any of you know either one of the attorneys that are here today? No. Yes, ma'am. Number 6?
Not personally, but I believe. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. And what is your name, please? I'll start with number 6 and I'll come to number 2. Number 6? Yes. Well, that could be bad or good. So is that going to influence you in one way or the other? Okay. Number 2. Oh, and I'm sorry, what is your name? No, number 6. Sorry about that. Number 6. What was your name? The one that said that you knew Kevin. You may not want to tell us who you are now. Okay. Thank you. Number 2. Okay, and is that going to influence you one way or the other today? Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Number 4, your name?
Angela Morosky.
Okay, and who do you know?
Kevin Blondin.
Okay. As a child or otherwise?
As a child or a wife?
No, I said a child or otherwise. Okay, so is that going to influence you one way or the other?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. And do any of you know any of these witnesses? I'm going to go through the witness names now. If you know any of the witnesses, again, I want you to raise your hand. Officer Kenneth Hardy of the Longview PD. Okay, number 4. And how do you know Officer Hardy?
We share a child.
Okay. And is that going to influence you one way or the other?
No.
Okay. And what about anybody else? What about Danielle Harris? Does anybody recognize that name? How about Amber Beaton? Does anybody recognize that name? How about Billy Joe Reese? Does anybody recognize that name? And Gary Fadden, does anybody recognize that name? Okay. As I said earlier, the defendant is charged with making a false statement to a public servant. Have any of you had any personal experience with this kind of a case? Do any of you have any personal experience in the law and justice field? And that's personal experience. Now, law and justice, let me be clear, that would be police, courts, attorneys, corrections, probation, anything like that. Does anybody have any personal experience? Do any of you have any family members engaged in this type of profession? Okay, this is unusual. Yes?
I just have a question. I don't really understand what you mean by those things.
In other words, does anybody you're related to work in these lines of employment? No? Okay. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Number 6.
One of a nephew that's a sheriff that's in Oregon.
Okay, and that's fine. Those are the kinds of things I'm looking for, because sometimes that might make a difference. So is that going to make a difference to you as far as having a relative in law enforcement, one way or the other? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Does anybody have a family member that's retired from this sort of employment or field? Okay. Now, after we've heard all the evidence, I'm going to give the jury detailed instructions on what the law is. I'm going to give you the legal definition of making a false statement to a public servant. You may think you know the definition, but there is a legal definition you're going to be provided. I'll go over how Ms. Fadden is presumed innocent, how the state has a burden of proving each element of the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm going to explain what the role of the attorneys is. I'm going to explain what the role of the judge is. And I'm doing that so that everyone is going to be on the same page when you're all deciding the case. So you're going to decide the case based on the instructions of law that I'm going to give you when you go back to deliberation. And this is going to be personally, or not what you personally believe it should be or what it is, but what it actually is legally. And as I said earlier, this case is going to be over by the end of the day. So let me ask you a question. And again, I need you to raise your paddle. I'm going to ask you who you are. Is serving on the case for one day going to be a substantial hardship for anyone? And if that's going to be an issue, then raise your hand now. You're going to get recesses. You are going to get an opportunity to take breaks. We'll have an hour lunch. So is anybody going to have an issue serving today? Number 5, yes, sir. And your name?
Thomas Miller.
And why is that, sir?
My conscience won't allow me to.
I'm sorry?
My conscience won't allow me to serve as a juror
Okay, and why is that, sir?
because I don't feel comfortable judging anyone guilty or innocent.
Okay, have you been on a jury before? Okay. And are you going to be able to be impartial today, or you're already starting out that you can't be?
I don't understand.
I mean, so you feel you cannot serve today?
Right.
Okay. Any follow-up questions, Mr. Blondin?
No.
Okay, Mr. Schuman?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, sir, you'll be excused. Go ahead and leave your paddle in the back. And you're still probably going to be called for service. Anybody else have any issues at all? Okay. Is there anything about this case that would cause you to have any sort of prejudice at all? Finally, do any of you know of any reason why you should not be a juror on this case today? Okay, what we're going to do at this moment is I'm going to have the attorneys approach real briefly, and then we're going to go right back into how we're going to proceed. Mr. Schuman, if you could come up, Mr. Blondin. And let's go ahead and go off the record.